This is the 1863 laundry and bakery for the insane asylum. Now, give you a little bit of a heads up on why all of a sudden there's an insane asylum here at Fort Malden. Fort Malden, of course, was used during the War of 1812. It was captured by the Americans in 1813. It was given back to the British at the end of the War of 1812 in July of 1815. It was briefly used continuously as basically as a peacetime garrison. So you'd find it used here and there by militia battalions. You might have some regulars show up here for brief amounts of time, but it's still being used as a garrison until 1836. They decided to abandon it. It was sort of their plan that, okay, the Americans aren't going to attack again. Let's abandon a lot of these sites, and that way we can save a lot of the money on protecting the country if there's not going to be anybody attacking. 1 year later, the rebellions break out in Upper Canada and Lower Canada. Massive battles are happening in 1837, 1838. They rush troops back into Upper Canada and start re-garrisoning these sites. So all of a sudden you find soldiers here at Fort Malden again starting to rebuild the earthworks, and by 1840 they've completely rebuilt this entire fort, and it had far more structures and a far more formidable site than it ever was back in the 1812 war. Of course, they built it too late. The rebellions were already finished. And you had this massive fort here once again in Amherstburg without any real threat. And so by the 1850s, they decided that this is sort of ludicrous, spending all this money on upkeep on this kind of fort. It was the same sort of thing that you found at like Fort Wellington and Prescott, or even Fort Frontenac in Kingston before they built Fort Henry. The same sort of deal. So they decided to abandon this fort, and they created instead what is known as a pensioner scheme. They took a whole number of veteran soldiers, essentially. They were pensioned off, but they were given land. They were given, some